Thank you very much, Joan. Nicely written introduction. That's because I wrote it. Thank you so much. So, let me begin with a question, which is, did you ever have to make up your mind? Well, I'm sure we all have, and that also happens to be a song title by a group called The Lovin' Spoonful, which I curated. Speaking of curation, I chose that for today's program. I think it's very apt because all of us do have to make decisions, and we wonder as we make a decision, did we do the right thing? Will what we chose to do hurt someone or not hurt someone? Is there a lesser of the evils? Is ethics involved? Did we do the morally right thing? And of course, what are the consequences? Well, for today's program, we're lucky enough to have two volunteers who are members of the society, each of whom will present a dilemma he faced. And the two presenters, by the way, to reduce the mystery as to who will be talking and presenting dilemmas. One will be David Sprinson, who'll go first, and the other will be Rich DeCiccio. And thank you so much for both of you for volunteering. Each will present a dilemma, give you some background about it, discuss what choices he faced to resolve the dilemma, and then ask you, what would you have done in that particular situation? And you hopefully will have some interesting responses. And each person then, David and Rich, will talk about, well, what he did and why. So, David, if you would go first, thank you so much.
Can, is this okay? Can you hear okay? He said I volunteered, but I felt like I was, I didn't feel I could say no to Mel, so I agreed under duress. But anyway, but with respect and appreciation. So I'm going to try and be very brief. And in discussing this, I am going to be presenting the way I experienced it at the time, not the way I would think about it now necessarily. And I want to address it in a way that to appreciate the fact that the people with whom I had disagreements, I think it was sincere and their perspectives were sincere. I think they were wrong, but that's neither here nor there. That's why so we could talk about what the situation. So let me give a very brief, I could talk about this, as I said to Mel, I could talk about this for about 4 hours. I want to be very brief and simplified. So I'm going to just so let me explain the situation, and very simply. Many of you know that I've been involved in community organizing for many years, founded the Long Island Progressive Coalition, more or less ran it directly and indirectly for about 40 years. In that process, and early on, I facilitated the process by which the LIPC affiliated with a statewide organization called Citizen Action of New York, and that affiliation took place in 1988. All right. And actually, as of 2013, actually, I was on the board for all those years, and they actually awarded me, for service after 25 years back in 2013. All right. The aim of the Progressive Coalition, from my point of view, and Citizen Action statewide, is to create an umbrella organization for progressive causes, for promoting human rights, social justice, and then effectively institutional transformation, systemic social change. That was the language of the Veatch grant, which we got for many years. I think the organizations may still get it, to promote systemic social change. Right. So that's the sort of the general background. Then in the middle of the teens, as part of the effort of Citizen Action to diversify its base, to diversify its program, and to really be sensitive to diverse communities and address problems of the systematically excluded, Blacks and Hispanics, etc. We increasingly developed the notion that we ought to use a racial lens in analyzing programs as to what we should support and not support. Something that I thought made perfect sense as a way of analyzing programs. What happened then in the mid-teens is that slowly that racial lens became increasingly an exclusive lens. And it was in my perception that the organization increasingly was narrowing down its, what seemed to me, the long historical mission of social justice to being a mobilizing organization around issues having to do simply with racial justice. I objected to that. Increasingly, the organization said, all of a sudden I found out, I was told, board meetings, that we have a new worldview. It's a worldview. The worldview is called racial capitalism. I said, what is racial capitalism? I understand finance capitalism. I understand Marxism. You know, what is racial capitalism? I said, there is no coherent theory of racial capitalism. I didn't understand. I disagreed with that. They developed increasingly the notion that, just to use an example of how the transformation took place, if you wanted to speak at board meetings, they would try and take an order of speakers, right? What they called a stack, you know, who wants to go next, etc. They developed the notion of a progressive stack, right? A progressive stack meant that if you wanted to speak, you offered to speak, right? But if you are lined up and then if someone from a minority group wanted to speak, they go first, right? So that became the increasing focus, right? I objected to the narrowing down of the focus of the activities of the organization. I was told that I was making new members of the board uncomfortable, right, by my criticism of aspects of the program. Right? Do you ever heard of the expression BIPOC? Everybody know what that means? Who knows anything about that? It has become an accepted understanding within progressive movement across the country. It stands for Black and Indigenous People of Color, right? So that became the center of the organization, right? I objected to that, what I consider to be a narrowing down of focus, right? And I was told that I was making people uncomfortable, and they were unwilling, and the BIPOC members of the board that were new were not willing to speak and were upset. I said I would be glad to engage in discussion with any one of them. Tell me who they are, let's talk. That never happened. But increasingly, the situation became such that really, here's the dilemma. I could accept this new notion of racial capitalism and the focus on, you know, promoting the issues, the exclusively promoting and the focus of the BIPOC community, right? That's one. Or I could resign from the board. That's two, right? Or I could continue to do promoting what I was doing internally within the board, hopefully in a respectful fashion. And I don't believe the people I was disagreeing with are not honest and dedicated in their views. Or I could leave them as they were, right? That my situation was, how do I deal with this slow and subtle transformation of the mission of the organization? A transformation, by the way, which was never explicitly discussed when we were told, as we were told, that that's our new worldview. It was not something that would have been discussed, that we analyzed. We were just told that's our new worldview, and then we did trainings to explain how we had to think and how we had to act on that. So this, by the way, is a situation, and I could say generalize. This situation was not unique to citizen action. I think the same thing has happened to the American Ethical Union. I think it's happened throughout the entire country among the progressive constituency. But I'm talking about the experience I had. And I think about it differently now than I did then. I didn't understand what was happening in the time. This is the 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. But increasingly, it was becoming a tense situation, right? So the question is, I mean, oversimplifying what could be much more detailed discussion, and Sue and Ken can remember some of these from a different angle and perspective. So, how does one respond as the situation transforms in terms of the mission of the organization, the self-understanding of the organization, right, and the effort to address, right, to target and focus on systematically excluded communities, and how do you deal with that? And and is how should I have responded? This is what we're asking. So I'm leave it open to you, and I certainly can explain anything further that you might want about the background, but I'll limit myself so as not to get carried away.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, if I was putting myself in your shoes, was I started this organization. I nurtured it for years and years and years. And so I think from a personal perspective, I would feel very hurt that something that I had started and nurtured was transforming without my active participation. So that would be the first thing, if I was in your shoes, that I would have to get over.
Just one clarification on this. That might be true about LIPC, but I did not start Citizen Action. Citizen Action was started, I won't go into the history of it. Yeah, well, I'm only talking here about Citizen Action and the statewide. This Long Island thing is a different issue. It's related, but not. It's another issue. So this Citizen Action one is a statewide, and that was an organization started in the early 80s. I won't go into the history of it, but it was something then which they had a local chapter on Long Island. We had a interesting relation with that local chapter for many years. Ultimately, they asked us, would we, the way they put it, would we like the franchise? And we negotiated a relationship, so we became an affiliate, an autonomous statewide affiliate of Citizen Action. All right, and then I was the key representative for many years and facilitated that process.
Yes, I had similar experiences. Specifically, many of you may know of the Southern Poverty Law Conference. For a while, it dealt with all centers of opposing all hate organizations and movements in the country. And about 2 years ago, I think it was, it shifted its focus, firing many of its white staff members and declaring that their primary concern hereafter would be civil rights issues. They modified somewhat later, returning some of their effort to what they had traditionally done, which was identify hate groups and violent groups, anti-Semitic and Christian nationalists, and so forth. But they changed their focus, and I have been a substantial supporter of that organization for many years. And what happened with it reminded me of what happened to my father, who was an early member of the NAACP, which at its origin was white and black in its leadership, was a multiracial organization. And when it made the change, they asked him, after years of service, to leave his role, as they were replacing their officers with all minority people. And that happened back, I think, before World War II even. Now, what I did was leave. If an organization adopts a program I can't support, I depart. So I would have left that organization. There are other organizations that support their goals without using their process.
So David, I guess I have some questions that I would have in my mind and being able to answer that. So I'll just present it to you and what you thought. One would be whether the organization now has developed or changed into an organization I can no longer support. If I can no longer support it, then I would leave. The other would be, has it changed so much that although I can support what they're doing, it's changed so much that maybe I would rather put my time and focus elsewhere. And the third would be whether it has changed, maybe I've lost my third train of thought here, but whether it has changed so much that I really can't support it and I have to leave. Okay, so I just see the different levels of analysis that you might bring to it in terms of where you want to spend your time. It's changed, but it's not what it once was, but I can continue to support it too, you know. I'll stay and go along with the program. I just wondered what you know,
I can respond. Well, you see, I did not, retrospectively, I would understand it very differently. I see it part of a national movement that took place in a way which we could talk about, right? Basically, it seems to me retrospectively, basically, they had bought into critical race theory, okay? And that became the worldview of much of the progressive movement, and I think it's been disastrous. But I didn't understand that at the time. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't understand. I just saw these changes, this tendency of narrowing down of the focus, all right? At the same time as I felt that there was a tremendous need to have a coherent statewide progressive organization, and the organization was building and had significant success, had great possibilities, and didn't want to lose those possibilities, and I didn't see them going away. The internal dialogue was somewhat different than the external politics, because when you get involved in the electoral process, you have to be much more sensitive to what the constituencies are. So there was a tension in some sense between how they were developing a self-understanding and what was required to be effective politically. And they were still being effective politically, and it was a question of priorities. So it's a process that I didn't understand what I would understand retrospectively now. So I was a board member. I wasn't just a member of an organization. I was a board member who had as much seniority as about anybody in the organization, and had a significant role to play in giving some guidance and direction to it. All right? And obviously that was increasingly tenuous.
Last comment.
Well, what comes to my mind is a context that I try and live my life through these days, which is acceptance leads to success. I try and keep that sentence in my mind daily, because if we accept where the group is, then we can stay there and potentially continue to influence in a positive manner.
I don't, Frank Miller Small, I think your hand is up in the Zoom room, and that will be the last question.
Yeah, David, tough situation. I've been there on the educational front in my school when the values changed. And my decision was to leave as soon as I possibly could, because I could not validate the values that I was supposed to teach by. So I understand that situation. My question to you is, you said that you tried to engage them in some kind of respectful dialogue and were rejected. I just want to make sure I understood that. And if that's true, did you have any allies who felt similarly to you? And did you feel that there was any value in whatsoever, either protesting with allies against this or being a lone wolf, and letting people know continuously that you saw things quite differently?
Should I respond to that, or are we? Okay. Well, as things are happening, uh, I, I didn't think of it as allies or conflict. I didn't see it as a organized alliance within the organization. I saw it as decisions that were somehow being made at some national level of some sort. I don't know. I didn't know where it was coming from, to be truthful. Now I have a different understanding of it. And I was just responding, might say in a regular, we had 4 meetings a year, for example, of the board. I was responding to the issues that are coming forth in the retreat and commenting on issues. Many of them I agreed with. I agreed on about using a racial lens to look at issues. I didn't agree on being exclusive lens. So, all right. So I should say something about what happened. I mean, just we have to bring this in for me. So at one point, then one of the co-executive directors called me to speak to me about this and the concerns that they had, and they asked me to resign. And I said I would not resign. I explained why, and then I wrote her a long letter explaining why I appreciated her concerns and where she's coming from and the pressure she's under. And I explained why I wouldn't resign and how I thought the organization, what the rationale of it, and it was not, and what should be done. And then within a couple of weeks of that, there was a statewide conference in which, at one workshop, I raised this question. That question generated a remarkable controversy at the workshop, which I didn't participate in, actually, but people were yelling and screaming at each other, about issues having to do with race and attacking whites and defending themselves. It was really. Then they said, well, I was responsible for that. So they organized a special board meeting, and they voted to remove me from the board. One person voted to keep me on. One person reluctantly sort of voted, almost abstained, etc. And the other, 15 voted to kick me off. And I was removed. And my involvement with Citizen Action ended in the late 2019. Right? That's all right. That's enough. Okay. Thank you.
Frank referenced working for the New York City Board of Ed, and I forget the year, but they had the strike, the 35-day strike in New York City over Brooklyn School District, and that was a moral dilemma also, but I'm not going there. Great discussion material. Okay. I was a guidance counselor in New York City, and I had a service aide who brought me a letter from his friend who, and when I read the letter, it was a couple of pages, it sounded like a suicide note to me. So, and I forget the language, I probably have the letter tucked away in one of my files in the basement that nobody else should ever walk into. And so I went to my supervisor, and he advised that I not respond the way I had wanted to. I said, I have to run to the apartment and check this out, because he wasn't in school that day. That was the first thing I did. He said, I don't think you should do that. He didn't, I don't know, I don't remember whether he said don't, but I went. And I took the student who was his best friend along with me. And drove him there. It was only a few blocks away. That doesn't make a difference, does it? And knocked on the door, no answer, knocked on the door some more, no answer, pounded on the door, and he answered. He said, no, that wasn't a suicide letter, that was something else. So I took a risk, not following my supervisor's advice. I think this is probably before we were required reporters, but there's another term for that. Joan probably knows it. Designated? Thank you. So So, came back to the school a little with my tail on the between my legs, a little embarrassed, a little, or maybe overreacting. And when that thought came to me to do this moral dilemma, I couldn't get it out. I said, well, let me find another one. Could not get that one out of my head. It has been with me all these years. So, what would you do? There's a guidance counselor sitting in an office. You see a letter that sounds like, you go to your supervisor, and you have this, what I consider an ethical dilemma. Do I respond? There were alternatives to get me off the hook, or do I take one of those alternatives? Somebody on the screen, Karen?
No, me.
Oh, go. Evan.
You mind if I walk up?
Sure.
Cool. So, as someone who worked in the school district, technically is still registered as a teacher's aide, I forget, or teacher's aide, one of the things. I'm still technically a mandated reporter from when I worked in the schools. As someone who also wasn't a teacher, I could never imagine myself taking a student out of reading that letter, saying, hey, who's this kid's best friend? Going to that kid, say, you're getting out of school with me, we're going to go check on your best friend, going to the door, supervisor or not. However, again, your position is different than mine. I was the lowest man on the totem pole at the time. I can imagine myself going, talking to my supervisor, saying, hey, I got this. What do you think? Cool. I'm going to step out real quick, check on this kid to see what the deal is. Not bring anybody out of the school. But worst comes worst, at that point, you say, hey, I got this letter. I don't know what the situation was at that point. Sorry for those who are on Zoom. I'm looking over at him as I go. Going, checking over. And at least at that point, it's a bit embarrassing, but at least you made sure the kid in this case, or the person for other situations, is okay. Sure, it's not the worst possible, it's not what you thought, but who cares? The kid's okay.
Okay.
This particular situation, I'm going with what the man who's telling the story says.
I just have a question regarding your bringing the other student with you, his best friend, putting him in a precarious situation with his friend, and the confidence that friends have with each other. Might you have gone alone?
Yeah, I could have. I'm imagining my thinking at the time was he knew where he lived, and he could take me, directly. So, yeah, there's several hands.
How did you get the letter? Was it sent to you, or did
No, the student brought it to me.
his best
his
friend
friend.
gave it to you,
Yeah.
right? And asked you for advice.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Okay.
It's a little hard, for me anyway, to assess the situation in the absence of the letter. How, to judge how seriously your concern should be taken is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And I assume that this friend was concerned enough about this. Did he think that it was going to be? Did he think that this was a serious?
Well, he brought it to me.
Because he was concerned about his friend?
Assume that, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It would be useful
Yeah.
to
have
be able
the
to
letter.
assess what, I would have, certainly
Yeah.
for me to assess what to do, but based
With,
on.
I would
what's the letter is.
say,
what it-
for me to have done that, I felt it was a legitimate concern, that it sounded like, yeah,
Can you hear me?
Donna? Oh, Donna, it was Donna speaking, yeah.
Being on the opposite side of trying to commit suicide, I would say you did a very good thing because it has happened to me where I've spoken about committing suicide, very dark place, and whoever heard me say that came and called the police or came themselves and rang the bell to make sure I was okay. So regardless what the supervisor said, I'm glad that person came to my house, or I don't know what I would have done.
I didn't understand what is the issue. The issue is that you were reprimanded for this act?
No, I actually wasn't. They just let it go.
Okay, the issue is, should you have gone to the kid's house?
Yes. Should I have been the one to respond, leave the school, take a student with me, as somebody else
And
pointed
what would
out?
have been an alternative?
Could have called the police, could have taken it over my supervisor's head, who was not going to respond at all. Yeah, I think that would probably be, tried to call the parent. I don't even know if I did that. I probably did, but I don't know.
Were you reprimanded in any way?
No. Yeah.
At this point, in terms of mandated reporting, you would be expected to go there. The new,
I would be expected to go there?
absolutely.
Wow.
If on the suspicion or the hint, you would be expected to go.
Oh, and I thought I would have been expected to report it,
No?
but
As a mandated,
wow.
we take, in social work and education, you take training to
Oh, I
understand.
feel better now. Okay. Ashley. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, the requirement to report is now active, and that rises above anything else. It's not just for abuse that you're required to report, but that circumstance.
Yeah.
And I know in New York that's difficult to accomplish.
Yeah, Ashley had her hand up.
Okay, newly working gal.
Very employed. To talk a little bit about my experience with the mandated reporter system, when I was in high school in 2017, that was the year that my school had just developed an online portal for students to leave anonymous tips for anybody that they were concerned about.
Right.
At the time, I want to say, I guess I was a victim of bullying, and a girl in my class who was not fond of me knew that one of my points of pride was my perfect attendance and started using the anonymous tip system to pull me out of class regularly. I can tell you what happens if you get reported as Suicide Watch in 2017. I don't know if it's different now. The first thing that happens is they pull you out of class. They take you to the guidance counselor's office. They call your parents and tell them they have to come get you from work immediately. Then it's New York State's rule that you're not allowed to go back to class until you've been cleared by a youth psychiatric center. The nearest one is in Suffolk County. It's an hour ride from my high school. I think I went like 17 times.
Oh my goodness.
She just kept doing it. There was no recourse, and the talk with the guidance counselor got shorter and shorter every time I went. She's like, "Yep, your name was on the tip again.
Wow.
I'm so sorry. You have to miss more school. You have to go. It's a 6-hour evaluation. They have to inspect you from every angle they can discover." And I had this big case on me where they said, "She's been back here 16 times in the past 3 months. Like, we have to make sure." My parents were not pleased. They were like, "Whatever you're doing to antagonize this girl, you have to stop, because this is causing a problem for our small business that we have to keep closing to bring you," and everything. Like, once they knew I was okay.
Yeah.
And after going through that whole experience, I was 16 years old, and I said with confidence, if this system helps one child, I would do it again in a heartbeat.
I don't see any Zoom hands, so thank you all.
Okay, I just want to say thank you to both David and Rich for volunteering and presenting such interesting dilemmas. Thank you so much. Joan?